They waited for ships that never arrived. Ice sealed the camp year by year. The cold decided who lasted. The year is 1881, and the Arctic looks endless and bright. Ice covers the sea like broken glass under a cold summer sun. To many people, the far north is a map of death. To explorers and scientists, it is a promise of meaning. The United States plans a bold mission of study and pride. Lieutenant Adolphus Greely stands on a small ship facing white horizons. He is calm and strict and careful in speech and thought. Washington has given him command of the Lady Franklin Bay Expedition. The goal is science and careful measurement in the high Arctic. Greely believes order can tame a place that defeats careless men. His crew moves with purpose across the cramped and creaking deck. They come from towns and farms and busy streets across the nation. Some seek honor and adventure and a fresh story for home. Some need work and pay and a new path for life. Each man hopes the ice will remember his name with kindness. The plan seems clear and wise and fully achievable to them. They will sail to Lady Franklin Bay, near the top of Ellesmere Island. They will build a station called Fort Conger with wood and will. They will keep records of weather and stars and the magnetic world. They will map the coast and chart the hard breathing of ice. This mission belongs to the first International Polar Year for Science. Newspapers praise the effort as progress and a national ascent. The public imagines banners and medals and a clean return. For a while, the sea agrees and parts its pale gates. The ship moves north through lanes of water cut by slow flows. Men write in journals and sing in the thin Arctic light. Greely checks charts by lantern and marks a careful, straight course. He dreams of measurements that will change how people see winter. He hopes to reach a record point far beyond earlier attempts. Yet the sea has secrets that no chart will ever show. The coast appears in late summer like stone under a white veil. They unload crates and tools and instruments onto a harsh beach. The station rises plain and square and strong against the wind. They name it Fort Conger and salute the flag with pride. A fire crackles and sends a dark line into the clear sky. For now, the Arctic feels stern but almost willing to help. Daylight hardly ends and work runs smooth across the camp. Letters are written and stories are told in tight circles. Laughter comes easily and warms the narrow rooms at night. The ice seems distant and the future seems close and bright. But the sun begins to sink and draws a long, slow ring. The water hardens at the edge of the bay each day. The first snow arrives in thin lines across the ground. Seals drift past like ghosts, and birds vanish from the sky. Silence grows from the shore and takes hold of the air. Greely watches the men and counts food and fuel with care. He files reports for Washington with precise and steady language. He believes discipline will hold when the light finally leaves. He does not yet see how long the night will last. He does not yet know the price that courage may claim. They raise the flag again, and it snaps in the wind. For a moment, the camp looks noble against a silver sea. The men cheer and call each other by name with warmth. They believe rescue ships will find them when summer returns. They do not hear the warning inside the quiet, moving ice. The Arctic sun keeps turning in a sky that never ends. Its light glides across Fort Conger like a slow tide of silver. For the men, each day feels clear, measured, and calm. They wake to the creak of wood and the breath of frost. Greely starts his rounds before others speak. He carries a notebook in his gloved hand and counts supplies. Discipline, he says, will be their warmth when fire runs low. The men nod, some believing, some pretending to believe. Inside the main hut, lamps glow with thin yellow light. Snow dust drifts through cracks, melting on the stove. Private Long sharpens tools, while Sergeant Brainerd cleans the chronometer. Every action has a reason, every movement a rhythm. They collect data from weather instruments buried in ice. Each entry is written in cold ink that freezes between words. Science keeps their minds busy, even as hunger whispers softly. They dream of coffee, apples, and the smell of rain. At night, the aurora dances above the camp like a living sea. The green light ripples and bends, painting their faces with wonder. For a few moments they forget isolation and the weight of miles. Someone hums a hymn, and the sound drifts into the dark. Letters from home sit sealed in a wooden box. They will wait for the supply ship promised before winter. The men still trust that help will come through the ice. Faith moves slower here, but it still moves. Weeks pass and daylight begins to fade. The sun touches the horizon and hesitates before sinking. A gray twilight spreads over the bay, quiet and endless. The dogs bark less, as if sensing the long night ahead. Inside the hut, laughter grows softer. The men ration sugar and speak less about food. Greely orders careful records of every can and every biscuit. He watches morale like he watches the sky. Storms arrive early and stay too long. Wind shakes the walls like an angry hand. The men push snow away from doors and curse the cold. One lantern falls and breaks, spreading a dark smell of smoke. Still they endure. They read aloud from the Bible and from old magazines. They tell stories of wives, brothers, and the farms they left behind. Every story ends with silence and a stare into the fire. Greely writes, "Morale steady, though provisions shrink." He hides his worry behind tidy handwriting and dry numbers. He knows the sea is already closing its path to rescue, but to say it aloud would break more than the ice. One morning, frost blooms inside the hut like white flowers. The thermometer sinks lower than anyone has seen. Men wake coughing, their beards frozen to their coats. Yet when ordered outside, they obey without question. Each breath forms a cloud that vanishes into the pale air. They measure wind and pressure as the world turns darker. The Arctic no longer feels gentle, only vast and watching. Hope becomes a ritual they repeat to stay human. The long night begins. Darkness folds over Fort Conger like a heavy hand. The sun dips below the horizon and does not return. Only a faint red glow lingers across the frozen bay. Inside the hut, lamps burn through the endless dark. Oil runs low, and the air grows thick with smoke. The men speak less now. Their voices fade under the sound of the wind. Greely keeps to his desk, writing daily in his journal. He notes the temperature, the rations, and the silence between them. He reminds the men that order is their lifeline. Without discipline, he says, even warmth will turn against them. Food remains steady but shrinking. A missing crate has caused long arguments by candlelight. Each man counts every biscuit, every grain of coffee. They begin to dream of meals as if they were prayers. The cold deepens. Frost creeps along the inside walls like white veins. Tools freeze solid, and the scientific instruments jam. A thermometer breaks with a sharp crack, scattering mercury like tiny stars. Greely bends over the ruined device in silence. He breathes slowly, his hands shaking from more than cold. He knows each loss of data means a piece of purpose lost. Science is what keeps them sane, and it is slipping away. Private Lynn grows restless, pacing through the narrow space each night. He mutters about light that never returns and dreams that feel too real. The men avoid his eyes. They have begun to measure fear as carefully as temperature. One evening, a dispute breaks out over food rations. A single can of soup goes missing, and accusations fill the air. Greely orders calm, his voice sharp as breaking ice. Silence follows, but trust no longer feels unbroken. Outside, the wind carves the snow into walls. The flag still stands, invisible in darkness, yet stiff in pride. Greely orders it raised each day, even when no one can see it. He believes symbols are stronger than despair. Weeks pass without message or sign of a ship. The men gather around the stove, watching its dim glow. They speak of home in whispers, as if afraid to wake the dark. Every word sounds like an echo from another world. In February, a man collapses while hauling ice to melt for water. Frostbite claims 2 fingers before help reaches him. Greely tends to him with quiet precision. He says survival depends on obedience, even when mercy feels cruel. The Arctic feels larger now, wider than the maps can hold. Every sound outside becomes a question without answer. Sometimes the wind stops completely, leaving only the pulse of their hearts. In that silence, they know how far they truly are. Still, work continues. Greely demands daily readings, notes, and reports without fail. Science, he insists, must survive even if they do not. His words linger, half hope and half command, frozen in the air. Outside, the aurora brightens across the black sky. It ripples like green fire over their camp, haunting and beautiful. The men stare upward, silent under its shifting light. It feels less like wonder now, and more like a warning. The world outside Fort Conger has turned silent again. After weeks of storm, the wind dies without warning. The sky clears, pale and endless, as if nothing had happened. The ice lies still, bright under the faint returning light. The men step outside and blink at the horizon. Their boots crunch on snow that glitters like glass. For the first time in months, there is no sound at all. The quiet feels wrong, too deep, too perfect to trust. Greely studies the sky through his telescope, his breath freezing on the lens. He notes the light returning, but sees no movement on the sea, no open water, no smoke from a ship, no promise of rescue. Only white emptiness, stretching farther than the eye can follow. Inside the hut, calm does not mean comfort. The men repair ropes, sledges, and the torn canvas from past storms. They sharpen blades dulled by ice and mend torn gloves with wire. Every task feels slow, done by hands that have forgotten warmth. The supply logs grow shorter each week. They stretch the rations with melted snow and thin strips of meat. Sometimes they chew on frozen leather just to silence hunger. No one speaks of it, but every man knows the truth. Greely writes in his log, "Discipline remains steady, morale uncertain." He hides the page quickly, not wanting the others to read it. He still walks the camp each morning, marking time with duty. To lead, he must look certain, even when faith is fragile. At night, the aurora fades, replaced by dim gray light. The color of the world seems to drain away. The men sit around the stove, speaking in fragments, finishing no sentences. They have run out of stories to tell. Private Lynn grows weaker. His hands shake as he writes in his notebook. Sometimes he stares into the distance as if hearing voices in the ice. The others watch him with fear they do not name. A fox appears near the camp one evening. It stands motionless, tail flicking, eyes bright with hunger. For a moment, the men feel something like joy, a sign of life. Then it vanishes into the snow, leaving only silence behind. The days blur together. The light returns for a few hours, then fades again into gray. Time itself begins to stretch and twist under the cold. They stop marking dates, only counting how many nights they have endured. Greely spends more time alone, reading the Bible by lamplight. His hands tremble when he turns the pages. He wonders if faith means believing in rescue or in purpose. Either way, he cannot let despair lead first. A faint cracking sound rolls through the ice one night. The men wake, thinking it might be the sea breaking open. They rush outside, eyes wide, hearts pounding with sudden hope. But the bay remains frozen, silent, and still. The calm deepens into dread. They realize the storms were noise, but this quiet is truth. The Arctic holds its breath, waiting for something unseen. Greely looks toward the horizon and whispers, "It is not over yet." By the spring of 1883, the Arctic gives no mercy. The supply ships that should have come never appear on the horizon. The sea stays frozen, thick as iron and silent as stone. No signal, no smoke, no sound of human life. Greely studies the chart spread across his desk. He traces the same routes again and again with a trembling hand. Every path south is closed by ice. Every mark on the map feels like a promise broken. The rations are almost gone. They boil leather, chew frozen bones, and scrape the last crumbs of flour. Men grow thin, their faces hollow, eyes lost in feverish light. Each movement costs strength that will never return. One morning, a decision forms like frost on glass. Greely calls the men together inside the hut. His voice is firm, but his face is pale and drawn. He says they will leave Fort Conger and march south for rescue. The camp falls silent. Some stare at him with disbelief, others with a desperate kind of hope. To stay means slow starvation. To leave means facing the Arctic itself. They pack what little remains, rifles, journals, and a few days of food. The flag is taken down, folded with care and sorrow. Greely watches the empty camp one last time. He whispers that Fort Conger will stand as long as men remember it. The journey begins under gray skies. They drag sledges across ice that cracks and moans beneath them. Wind tears at their faces, freezing tears before they fall. Each step feels heavier than the one before. They travel through fog, losing sight of the coast. Compass needles spin without reason. Sleep comes in bursts of pain and shivering. Hunger moves with them like a silent companion. Private Lynn collapses near a ridge of broken ice. He tries to stand, but his legs refuse to obey. Greely orders the men to lift him onto a sledge. No one speaks. Only the wind answers with a long, hollow cry. Days blend into each other. The temperature drops even lower than before. Their clothes stiffen with frost, their fingers bleed through the gloves. They melt snow for water, tasting iron and salt. At last they reach Cape Sabine, a barren place of rock and shadow. There they find a small supply cache left years before. It is almost empty, only a few tins and scraps of cloth. Greely stares at it as if expecting more to appear. They build rough shelters from driftwood and torn canvas. The cold seeps through everything, biting even in sleep. Food runs out within weeks. Men start counting hours instead of days. The Arctic no longer feels vast or noble. It feels alive, watching them with cold indifference. One man whispers that the ice is whispering back. No one laughs anymore. Snow buries the tents, rising each night like a slow tide. The wind howls through gaps and shakes the thin walls. Greely writes by flickering flame, his pencil dull and trembling. He records not science now, but survival. He ends one page with a line he never reads aloud. The storm has come, and we are its measure.
Cape Sabine becomes a grave of snow and silence. The men no longer speak of rescue. They speak only of the next meal, the next breath, the next dawn. The wind never stops, cutting through canvas and bone alike. Greely moves between the tents each morning, counting those still alive. He writes names in his notebook with steady but shaking hands. The list grows shorter every week. He forces his voice to stay calm, though the words taste like ash. They ration food with brutal precision. A spoonful of soup, a scrap of sealskin, a few leaves of lichen. When a man dies, his share is divided without ceremony. Grief is a luxury they can no longer afford. Snow drifts bury the camp higher each night. They dig tunnels through the white, crawling like ghosts. The sound of shovels has become their only prayer. Inside the shelters, breath turns to frost on every surface. Private Lynn, once restless, now lies silent near the fire. He whispers names no one recognizes, reaching for things that are not there. When he stops breathing, Greely closes his eyes and marks another line. The living turn away, unable to watch. Days lose meaning. There is no difference between night and day anymore. The light from their single lantern flickers weakly against the walls. Hope shrinks to the size of its flame. Greely orders all scientific instruments packed away. He says their survival now is the only record that matters. The notebooks lie frozen under snow, filled with data no one will read. He keeps one page for himself, writing simply, "We endure." The sea stays locked under ice. Once they hear cracking in the distance and believe it may open. They rush outside, shouting into the white. But it is only the ice shifting, mocking them with false promise. Some men begin to lose their minds. They argue over shadows, accuse each other of hiding food. One man steals a tin of meat and is caught. Greely has him executed with a single shot. The act breaks something inside them all. No one speaks for hours afterward. Even the wind seems to stop in horror. Greely writes, "Justice remains, though mercy has left." Storms come again, blinding and endless. Snow fills the air like smoke, hiding everything beyond a few feet. The tents shake and bend, the ropes screaming in the wind. Inside, men lie still, waiting for sound to fade. When the storm passes, only 6 rise to their feet. They look around and see what remains of their camp. The world is silent, except for the groan of moving ice. Greely feels both victory and defeat in the same breath. He gathers the survivors near the flag. It lies frozen, stiff as a board, its color long gone. He raises it anyway, his hand steady despite the pain. It flutters weakly, a memory of something once proud. In his final note that winter, he writes, "The body breaks, the will endures. We are not yet gone."
June 1884 arrives with pale sunlight and an uneasy stillness. The survivors lie inside their shelters, too weak even to rise. Their faces are thin, their lips cracked, their eyes half open. The Arctic air moves softly, as if afraid to disturb them. Greely wakes to a distant sound beyond the wind. At first he thinks it is only his mind playing tricks. Then he hears it again, slow and steady, like oars cutting ice. He crawls to the tent's edge and peers into the mist. Across the frozen bay, dark shapes move through the fog. Voices echo faintly, human voices calling across the white silence. He blinks hard, afraid the sight will vanish if he breathes. But the sound grows clearer with every heartbeat. The rescuers have come at last. After 3 long years, the world has not forgotten them. Men stumble from the tents, shielding their eyes from the light. Some weep, others simply stand still, unable to believe what they see. Strong hands reach for them, wrapping bodies in blankets. The rescuers lift them carefully, whispering soft words of comfort. Warmth returns in waves, painful and real. The frozen world begins to break apart around them. Greely stands unsteadily, leaning on a wooden pole for balance. He watches as each survivor is carried toward the boats. Their faces are hollow, yet their eyes burn with faint life. He feels both gratitude and sorrow, too deep for words. A young sailor kneels beside him, offering water. Greely shakes his head, whispering, "See to the others first." The man nods and moves on, leaving Greely alone with the sea. He looks across the bay that once imprisoned them. They board the ship one by one. The deck feels strange underfoot, solid after years of shifting ice. A surgeon moves among them, counting heartbeats, binding wounds. When he finishes, only 6 men remain alive. As the vessel turns south, the shore fades into pale mist. No one speaks. The hum of the engine feels like the sound of the world returning. It is the first rhythm of life they have heard in months. Greely sits near the rail, wrapped in heavy blankets. He looks toward the horizon, whispering a prayer without voice. He remembers the faces of those who never left the ice. Their names echo softly in his mind, one by one. That night, they sleep under real warmth for the first time. They wake to the smell of broth and voices full of care. Someone laughs quietly, startled by the sound of joy itself. The ship rocks gently, as if cradling them back to life. In the morning, sunlight spills through the fog like liquid gold. Greely breathes deeply, tasting salt and the promise of return. He closes his eyes and lets the light rest on his face. For the first time in years, he believes the nightmare has ended. The ship sails south through drifting fog and broken ice. The survivors lie in silence, too weak to speak for long. Each hour brings a little more warmth and a little more pain. The thawing of their bodies feels like a slow return to life. Greely sits near the window of the cabin assigned to him. He watches gray waves move under the first clear sky in years.
Salt air replaces the smell of smoke and frozen flesh. He tries to believe they are safe, but his hands still tremble. At every port, rumors travel faster than the rescue ship itself. Reporters wait with questions before the anchor even drops. How many survived, they asked, and what happened to the rest? The answers will come slowly, heavy and cruel. When they reach Newfoundland, the world meets them with shock. Crowds gather at the pier, waving flags and weeping openly. But behind the cheers come whispers of horror and doubt. People speak of cannibalism, of madness in the Arctic dark. Greely does not defend himself at first. He can barely stand, his body worn down to bone. Yet when he finally speaks, his voice is calm and level. He says his men acted with discipline, courage, and faith. He remembers their faces as he says it. He remembers their silence, their hunger, their loyalty until the end. The world may debate his words, but he knows their truth. Each name written in his journal is a promise kept. Funerals follow in quiet succession. The coffins are draped in flags, the air thick with grief. Families weep beside boxes that contain only what could be found. Bugles sound across the harbor, fading into low wind. In Washington, officials praise the scientific results of the mission. Charts, instruments, and notes are displayed in glass cases. Visitors see measurements and diagrams, but not the cost of each line. Greely stands apart, his eyes fixed on nothing. At night, he dreams of the ice. He wakes to the sound of waves and still listens for wind. His wife sits beside him in silence, knowing words cannot help. He whispers the names of his men until sleep returns. The newspapers move on within weeks. Other stories take their place, new disasters to mourn. Only a few remember the faces printed in black ink. The rest fade into the background of history. Greely continues to serve, though his strength never fully returns. He writes reports, gives lectures, and avoids the gaze of reporters. Each time he speaks, he begins with the same line. The Arctic tested our science, but it tested our humanity more. The survivors visit him sometimes, fewer each year. They sit together without speaking, sharing the same distant look. Between them passes the silence of the frozen north. They know what they endured, even if the world does not. Outside his window, the sun sets over calm Atlantic water. He thinks of the endless twilight at Fort Conger and the men still there. The sea has carried him home, but part of him remains in the ice. He bows his head, whispering, "We lived, but we did not return."
Years pass, and the story of Greely's expedition begins to fade. The Arctic grows quiet again, keeping its secrets under layers of ice. New explorers come and go, chasing records and glory of their own. The world moves forward, leaving the old ghosts behind. In libraries and museums, a few documents remain on dusty shelves. Weather charts, faded letters, and photographs of thin, hollow faces. Visitors stop for a moment, then move on to brighter displays. The silence between those relics feels heavier than the objects themselves. Greely grows older, his hair turning white, his gait slow. He lives in a modest home filled with journals and memory. Sometimes he sits near the window, watching snow fall in the city. He says it never looks quite the same as it did in the north. Reporters visit him from time to time. They ask about leadership, courage, and the meaning of sacrifice. He answers softly, his eyes unfocused, still seeing endless white horizons. He tells them that courage is not loud and that honor is quiet. Many of his men are forgotten entirely. Their graves lie scattered across frozen ground and distant cemeteries. Families have moved, names have changed, memories have blurred. Yet somewhere, a journal, a compass, or a torn glove still carries them. Historians later open the old logs and measure what the men achieved. Their records of temperature, wind, and magnetic force shaped polar science for decades. But the true record lies not in numbers, but in what they endured. Every page holds the breath of a man who refused to give up. Sometimes Greely rereads those pages late at night. He traces his own handwriting, older now, slower, almost foreign. He remembers the men laughing before the silence came. He remembers the sound of snow against canvas, steady and endless. When he speaks at universities, the students listen politely. They know his name, but not the weight behind it. To them he is history, a chapter before their own. He smiles gently, too tired to correct them. In his final years, he writes once more, not for science, not for the military, but for the men themselves. He writes that the Arctic holds all memories without judgment, that the ice keeps every sound, every breath, and every word. Outside, winter returns, as it always does. Snow drifts over the world, clean and quiet. The past lies beneath it, untouched and unseen. Greely closes his eyes, hearing again the wind of the north. The years turn quietly, and the Arctic remains as it was. Wind still crosses the frozen bay where Fort Conger once stood. The huts are gone, the flag long buried beneath the snow. Yet the place still holds the breath of those who lived there. In spring, sunlight touches the ice with golden light. It glows across the ruins like a hand laid upon memory. No footprints remain, but the silence feels shaped by human presence. The Arctic forgets nothing, it only waits. Historians return decades later with cameras and notebooks. They find rusted cans, pieces of glass, and fragments of wood. Each object tells a story of endurance, discipline, and quiet suffering. Even the air feels different, filled with echoes that never fade. Far away, in Washington, Greely's name is carved in stone. His medals rest in a museum behind a pane of clean glass. Visitors pass by, reading a plaque and moving on. Few linger long enough to feel the chill behind the words. Greely lived to old age, honored and haunted. He served his country, spoke rarely of the expedition, and never exaggerated. When asked how he survived, he said, "By faith and by duty." It was the simplest truth he could give. He died quietly, surrounded by family and light. At his funeral, the flag that once froze in the Arctic wind was raised again. It fluttered gently above the crowd, warm and bright under the sun. The band played slow, each note carrying the weight of memory. For those who remember, the Greely Expedition is more than tragedy. It is a story of how far courage will go when hope is gone, of men who measured not only the Arctic, but themselves. Their endurance became the map of the human spirit. In the north, storms still rise and fade. Auroras burn and vanish over the silent ice. Each wave of color feels like a heartbeat from another time. It is easy to believe the men are still out there, watching. The world they helped measure is warmer now. The ice melts faster each year, uncovering what was once untouchable. Yet when explorers stand at Fort Conger, they still speak Greely's name. They whisper it like a prayer carried by the wind. Every story has an ending, but some endings never close. The Arctic keeps its dead, but it also keeps their light. Greely's voice, calm and steady, still lives in the journals he left behind. He wrote that courage is not the absence of fear, but its companion. And so his story remains, quiet, distant, eternal. In every storm, in every silence, his legacy endures. The ice listens, the sky glows, and the world remembers. Even now, the wind carries the faint sound of their return.